Hopefully you all can hear me. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight to learn about a comprehensive water planning effort for the Big Sky community that will help protect and enhance our treasured river systems, the Madison and the Gallatin, as the Big Sky community continues to grow. My name is Kristen Gardner. I'm Executive Director of the Gallatin River Task Force, and we are a nonprofit watershed group headquartered here in Big Sky and focusing on river conservation in the Upper Gallatin. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about a project that the Gallatin River Task Force was the host for, the fiscal sponsor, and the lead for community outreach called the Big Sky Sustainable Water Solutions Forum, which developed a watershed stewardship plan that you will hear about tonight. So about a year and a half ago, we brought together 35 stakeholders representing diverse entities with diverse perspectives that included conservation, developers, state and local government, recreation, and community leaders in Big Sky. And we brought all these stakeholders together to think about water in Big Sky and how to best protect it as our community grows. I feel so fortunate that we had so many smart people working on water in Big Sky. And if all the stakeholders are up here in the front rows could raise their hands. So we have a lot of those stakeholders here in the room to answer any of your questions as we move on with the agenda. But again, I want to thank them all for their hard work and their efforts and their long travel. Some of them came from Helena to meet on a monthly basis to develop this plan. And so the plan has three focus areas: ecological health of the river systems, water supply and availability, and wastewater treatment and reuse. I'd also like to thank the funders of this plan. The main funders were Big Sky Resort Tax and Gallatin and Madison counties. Thank you so much for your support. We also had initial seed funding from the Big Sky Water and Sewer District, the Lone Mountain Land Company, and the Yellowstone Club. So thank you so much for your support to get this effort off the ground. So tonight we have the stakeholders will be presenting to you the plan. We'll start off with Dave O'Connor. He is the owner of Bucks T4 and the president of the Big Sky Chamber, and he'll be talking about why this plan is very important for our community and our rivers. Following that, we will have Jeff Dunn, who is one of the two consultants that we hired to facilitate this process. And actually, I need to recognize them because they did a tremendous job in helping us corralling all of us 35 stakeholders and actually coming out with a plan in the time that we intended to. So thank you to Karen Filipovich. She's a professional facilitator. And then Jeff Dunn, he is a watershed scientist, and he gathered information so that we could make decisions based on science and local information. So thank you so much to the two of you as well. So anyway, back to the agenda. Jeff will be guiding you through this comprehensive plan. It's almost 200 pages. But he will guide you so that you can find the bits of information that you might be interested in if you don't want to read the entire plan. Following Jeff, we'll talk about the three focus areas. So Bob Zimmer will focus on the ecological health of our river systems, the recommendations that came out of the plan under that topic. Following Bob will be Mike Richter. And Mike Richter is with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. He'll be talking about water supply and availability. Following Mike will be Ron Edwards, the general manager of the Big Sky Water and Sewer District. He will talk about the wastewater treatment and reuse. And then Tammy Swinney will follow up with the unresolved issues, and Tammy is with the Gallatin Local Water Quality District. After those presentations, I will talk about the implementation recommendations. And then Scott Posse from American Rivers will close out talking about the importance of rivers in our communities. So thank you all again for coming out this evening, and I will hand it over to Dave.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. As Kristen said, my name is David O'Connor. I've been a resident here in Big Sky for almost 30 years. I'm also the president of the Chamber of Commerce, one of the co-owners at Bucks T4 down in the canyon. So I kind of cover a lot of bases. except for the bases that everybody else in this group covered. I'm not an engineer or a lawyer or a state official or anything like that, but boy, those people were there. And then we also operate a water system down in the canyon, and the canyon is very much part of Big Sky, but not connected to its water system. So that was a piece as well. The canyon's very diverse, so I kind of pinch hit and trying to at least say what I know about what goes on down there. So I just briefly want to describe a little bit of the process of how we went about doing what we're doing, and I still kind of chuckle when I was asked to discuss the importance of this process to the Big Sky community. I keep saying I got the easy job. I think everybody, raise your hand if you think this is important. So as far as the purpose, it was extremely important right off the bat that we get college at a diverse stakeholder group and a complete stakeholder group. And I will just echo, and Kristen alluded to this as well, I was just awed by the sheer brain power in these rooms and participating in these meetings. I got a college education in water science and hydrology and geology and all sorts of things. I'm quite confident that this was the right group of people in the room. An extremely diverse representation, environmentalists, landowners, citizens, community groups, and quite a bit of state and local and federal, for that matter, involvement as well. So the diversity of the group was extremely important right from the beginning. And then we outlined some ground rules as far as process. As Kristen also alluded to, and I would just echo, I've been a part of a bazillion strategic planning and all sorts of different facilitated processes, and what Karen and Jeff were able to advance, right? This group was absolutely second to none. This was a group of busy people. If you know, Jack Ekman was a resident of Big Sky for years and helped the chamber years back with some strategic planning, and his point that always stuck with me was, you don't want people on the group that have time on their hands, right? You want the busy people, and those people are really hard to get together, and they kept coming back, which was extremely telling to me as well, that these people found value and found validity and credibility in the process. So I hope that you will take that as a sign of what was accomplished here, and that the right people were at the table. The ground rules we agreed on, it was very important that we have that we consider all options thoughtfully, regardless of where your particular sandbox was, that we acknowledge the professionalism and the expertise of everybody that was in the group, and that we gave everything a pretty as objective a consideration as we could for all the different options. And a lot of different things were thrown in and out, kicked back and forth, and it was quite an impressive process to be a part of. And then as far as the importance, whether you are a business person, a community with environmental interests, community member, a recreationalist, a landowner working to maximize your investments in the property that you own, I just can't think of anybody whose interests are not represented in the water system, the water situation in Big Sky. What I appreciated about this effort was that it really brought together, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of different parts of this at different times, but this was the first time I've seen a group like this come together and really address those interests. So with that being said, we will move on. I believe Jeff is next.
Right, my name is Jeff Dunn, and I'll just kind of walk you guys through what is the Big Sky Area Sustainable Watershed Stewardship Plan. So just to look at it, we got the plan essentially broken into three sections. We have a short introduction. We have a section we're calling Alternatives Analysis for the areas in which this group reached consensus. And it's focused on our 3 water resource focus areas. And there's 12 total alternatives that we go through that there's consensus on. And then the third section is the implementation plan. And then there's a good chunk of appendices. So within the introduction, we kind of go through how this was a stakeholder-driven process, outline some of the community engagement and input that were accomplished, the goals and objectives of the forum, some of the challenges and opportunities that were facing the community in terms of water resources, expected outcomes of this process, and then a brief kind of introductory to the project area boundaries, looking at both the river systems and the sub-watersheds we're talking about, as well as the ownership boundaries and the demographics. And a couple of those maps in that section are displayed here. so you can take a look at those. Within the section 2, which is the alternatives analysis for the areas of consensus, we have our 3 focus areas, which are the ecological health of the river systems, water supply and availability, and wastewater treatment and reuse. So in the ecological health of the river systems, the alternatives that the group agreed on was watershed status and trends monitoring program, a watershed status and trends dashboard, and then watershed restoration and conservation. Within the water supply and availability focus area, areas with agreement included groundwater monitoring and modeling, strategies for water conservation, stormwater management, and mitigation of water rights. And then in the wastewater treatment and reuse focus area, areas with consensus were to treat the wastewater to the limits of technology, address septic systems and small community systems, expand water reuse for irrigation, develop water reuse for snowmaking, and investigate shallow groundwater recharge. So each one of these sections is essentially broken into 2 pages discussing each of these alternatives. And within each of those 2 pages, we kind of go through a standard process where we review the purpose of the alternative, technical considerations, policies, regulations, and laws, economics and cost considerations, community interest and support, and potential partner organizations. So if you're interested in kind of one of these subject areas, there's a 2-page kind of piece that you can review and kind of go through and try to answer and see all these questions that we kind of grappled with and the conclusions we came up with for each area. And then the third section is the implementation plan. So this is, how we're going to implement these ideas and start getting stuff done. There's a discussion on the capacity needs for implementation, the partnerships that participated in this forum and the need for ongoing engagement, as well as funding. And then we developed action items for each of the 12 alternatives, and we broke those into quick start things we could do right now, short-term things, and then things in the mid to long term. So we're looking kind of on a 10-year type planning horizon. So just to take an example of what one of those looks like, everything is kind of a 1 or 2 page blurb on those as well, and then a table. And then the tables, kind of broken into columns, what we want to do in the quick start, moving into short term, mid term, and long term, and the activities kind of progressing through them. And then finally, we have the appendices, which has included a bunch of the stuff that went on around the forum and in the forum, a summary of the initial kind of work, a bunch of summaries of the stakeholder presentations that occurred in the forum, which are also available on the task force website, a community survey that was conducted for outreach, some of the sub-watershed maps, environmental indicators, some analysis we did on water yield, some of the unanswered questions, which we'll talk about later, and then some infographics, which you can see kind of on these colorful boards in the back of the room. And that is the report in a nutshell.
Good job. All right. Have a good night.
I'm Bob Zimmerman with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in the Ecological Health kind of working group as we set this up. And the last time I addressed this group, it turned into I had 10 minutes to go, and it turned into a 15 or 20 minute ramble fest. So tonight I have notes, and hopefully I'll keep that to a more concise program for you guys. When we set up the Ecological Health work group and we started working on some of the things that we needed to address, definitions were really a big piece of what we had to confront. What were we working on? Where were we working? What were the things that had been done ahead of us? And so in order to develop that scope, we spent a lot of time trying to define ecological health. What does it mean to the group? What does it mean to the community? And where do we focus? And to some degree, ecological health is a terrestrial thing, it's a wildlife thing, and we really had to work hard to bring that back to the ecological health of the river systems. One of the big things that came out of that work also was we needed to understand measure, and monitor ecological health. This is not a steady state system, so things can change a lot as you go through the various parameters. And ecological health also reflects the baseline that you use to start from. So Big Sky has had a lot of change from the time that humans first got here, and we see it every day when we drive up and down the roads. How do those things impact the measurement, analysis, and understanding of our ecosystem and ecological health? Another big piece of the work that the group did was to look at what has been done in the watershed up till now. So we had a lot of reports, a lot of input, and as Kristen and others have said, a lot of smart people in the room to look at a lot of the issues. One of the background reports that we really looked at hard and will continue to be part of our work going forward is the restoration plan that was put together in 2008 and 2009. And that reflects a lot of the things that we've seen as far as impacts and uses in the watershed. Another thing that came up for the group was finances and economy. The ecological health of the watershed really structures what we do and how we enjoy the world, the Big Sky area. Everybody came here because it's so beautiful. We have great water resources. These are places that we want to recreate and enjoy, but we also have an economy based on that. So that was a big piece of the conversation. And I think the final issue that we really had to confront when we were starting to look at ecological health was how our three focus areas interacted. And that was a big piece of how the group was going to look at what we needed to do and accomplish in this watershed sustainability plan. So all of our areas are really interlaced. Ecological health is dependent on water availability. Where does the water come from? How is the water used? Water reuse. How does water get back into the system, both natural hydrology and then man-made or water treatment and reuse. So those three areas were really interdependent as we went through the analysis of challenges and big issues and things moving forward. So one of the great big issues that we confronted was, as was pointed out in the TMDL, was currently we have impaired waterways in the system. And that was something that we, from the very beginning, said we wanted to continue working on those issues and moving those forward. Another thing is climate. We had to deal with climate and growth. Those issues are kind of covered in how we're going to analyze and monitor the systems going forward. And then the last thing that the group really came up with is we didn't want to have outside regulation or Big Brother looking over us in terms of federal or state agencies. The Water Solutions Forum also decided that trends, understanding trends, was a really big piece of this. Do we have things going well, bad, and can we do something about it to create the correct trends and water quality? So, the three recommendations that the group has made coming forward are the Status and Trends Monitoring Program. A really good presenter reads verbatim from the slideshow, right? The highlights that I want to bring out for you here are track water quality trends. Like I said, that's going to be a key piece in us moving forward and having a long-term healthy environment. It covers wetlands and fisheries and in-stream habitat. Those are real priorities for the group. And then document improvements as we move forward. The plan highlights a couple things that we want to get out of that. Primarily, we see working groups as a way to develop the technologies to monitor this. So one of the big recommendations is going to be to get a technical advisory committee to work on a monitoring and analysis plan. Another piece of this plan that's really important is the interaction between the different focus areas. So here you see that water reuse and snowmaking will require monitoring for pre-permit and compliance uses. We want to understand how those new uses of water will be either beneficial or impact the ecosystem. the Watershed Dashboard. This was another piece that the ecological group really felt was important in terms of pulling everybody together, the community, and having a clearinghouse, if you will, or a central point for documentation and understanding of the watershed. So we want to monitor processes and environmental indicators, a physical structure, so billboard of some kind that we could have show up. You've seen these around. We could do something like this and put water flow or water quality on the drive into Big Sky. And sometimes they're really very descriptive. And then the final thing was target or trigger values. When you see a threshold in the environment that is going wrong, how do you address that, and how do you know when to take action? That was the triggers and targets. Adaptive management was another big piece of this process. How do we get into that adaptive management mode and work with other parts of the forum outcome? And then the highlight of this slide is to show that Jeff Dunn does not know how to spell stormwater. No, I'm sorry. Adapt as needed. Actually, he corrected some of my slides, so I got to give that to you, Jeff. Thanks. But the real key here is that the program helps us adapt to things as they show up and as they are needed, and then addresses things like the TMDL. So we know that we're making progress and we're taking care of the business at hand for the program. And then finally, and I think this is the big one for me personally, but I think also for the ecological people, was the connectivity and the biology and the ecology. Make sure that those are working together well. Update the TMDL process, and then make sure that we have an abundance of wild and native fish. And, so there's a couple ideas here. Again, identify partners, engage landowners. These are ways that we're going to accomplish our goal. Okay, cheeseball ending alert. We did it! Yeah! Everybody work together. We brought a big group of people together. We're going to eat rainbow ice cream and with unicorns. But no, really, the whole idea behind this is a great place to start. And so what I'd like to take home from the Ecological Health group is we've got a place to start. We're going to move forward and, in the end, protect and enhance the ecological health of the water system. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. My name is Mike Richter, and I work at the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. I'm also a Gallatin Canyon resident. I live down at Karst. And I'm going to talk tonight about water supply and availability. Okay, so on the first slide, you may notice what we've got is a public water supply well hiding out in the tall grass here. And on the right is one of our monitoring wells. That's here in the Meadow Village Aquifer. So we're going to be talking about some of the data that's coming from that monitoring well in this talk. This well is instrumented with sensors that take hourly water level readings. Big Sky runs on groundwater. Point number one. We don't have any surface water reservoirs that we can pull water out of. We pump it all out of the ground here. That's how we get our water. So we're going to look a little bit at hydrogeology and aquifer types. The biggest takeaway point on the hydrogeology here is that our shallow sand and gravel aquifers that we've got are our best aquifers. By best, what I mean is we're getting our highest well yields and our best water quality from these shallow sand and gravel deposits. 60 feet deep is what we're looking at for maximum depth on these things. So they're quite shallow. These aquifers are connected to surface water, and they are vulnerable to contamination, being that close to the surface. The Meadow Village Aquifer is where we're going to look at that pretty in depth. There's an ongoing groundwater investigations program study and model. Groundwater investigations program is a Bureau of Mines and Geology program that's doing a detailed look at the Meadow Village Aquifer right now. So we're going to look at their depth contour map, water level data from that monitoring well in the Meadow Village, recharge patterns, groundwater surface water relationships, pumping impacts to stream flow, and the need for monitoring, modeling, conservation, and reuse. Or as I'm calling it, groundwater catch and release. I always like to get out on a limb a little bit, so stay tuned for that. I also always like to get a picture of Ron Edwards up at some point. And I will not disappoint. Okay, so here's an overview of the Big Sky area. Different colors representing different geology types. I'm not going to get into all that. The blue dots and triangles are where we, the Bureau of Mines and Geology, is monitoring groundwater in the area. There's 22 sites. All that data goes into the GWIC database. That stands for Montana's Groundwater Information Center. So you can find any of this stuff on our website. So if we zoom in a little bit further, these yellow, tan, buff-colored blobs are these sand and gravel deposits. We're here right now at the blue star. So we're sitting on this Meadow Village aquifer right now. This is where this GWIP study is underway. There's another sand and gravel aquifer, what we're calling the Lower Basin aquifer, just because it was labeled Lower Basin on USGS topographic maps, also known as the canyon. Basically, this deposit runs from the junction of Highway 191 and Route 64 to the south down near Doe Creek. It's actually quite similar to the Meadow Village aquifer in that it's a shallow sand and gravel deposit sitting on top of shale units. Difference being the stream that's connected to that aquifer is the Gallatin River, whereas here the stream that's connected to the aquifer is the Westwater. So let's zoom in even a little further. This is this depth contour map that the investigations program put together. So the first thing to notice here is that most of this deposit is only 10 to 20 feet thick. The usable part of this aquifer is shaded here, where we have depths up to 60 feet. Sure enough, that's where the public water supply wells are that are supplying the water for the Meadow Village. So this is what I termed in a previous presentation as the meat bucket. That's some fly fishing terminology. The meat bucket in fly fishing is a deep spot in the stream where the big fish hang out. In the aquifer, it's where you get your good well yields. I did not call it the meat ocean. It's the meat bucket because overall this is a small area we're dealing with, but it's a highly productive aquifer. So if we look at some of our water level data from this aquifer, we got about 10 years of data here. This is from that monitoring well we were looking at in the opening slide. This is hourly data, so what we're looking at is depth to water level below ground. The vertical grid lines are January 1, so these are year intervals we're looking at. So the first thing you notice is that we got 2 bumps in every year. And those are the recharge events. So the first bump is snow melt. Second bump in each year is this fall recharge that we see pretty much every year. What that is storm water. That's precipitation events recharging the aquifer. The other thing you can notice on here is that 2012, we're kind of in this downward trend here. And so just kind of showing us that this system does respond to droughts. You get a dry phase, and we did see declining water levels. If we zoom in a little further, just on the last 2 years of data, we can see where that public water supply well started to pump. That's these dropping water levels right here. So sure enough, when that well pumps, it impacts the water level in the monitoring well. And that's what that is. The other thing you can notice that right at the end, from this fall, you can see a 3-foot water level rise in this aquifer that started in mid-September from all those big storms that we got. So that is storm water recharging the groundwater system. So this is a great advertisement for strong stormwater management in this area. Because as we develop Big Sky, and we keep paving things and covering things in concrete and metal roofs, we potentially interfere with that system that lets precipitation recharge the aquifer. Okay, here's the West Fork now, flowing across this sand and gravel aquifer. As the West Fork enters the up gradient end of this aquifer, the western edge, it's losing water into the groundwater system. So water is leaving the stream channel into the aquifer. But as it continues to the east, it transitions. As you go east, the water table gets closer to the land surface, and the stream actually begins gaining water back from the aquifer. And this is fairly common in these types of aquifers. Streams can change from losing to gaining as they flow through these kind of highly permeable aquifers. So to look at what I'm talking about in a cross section, a losing stream here at the top, you've just got a water table that's at a lower elevation than the stream, and so the groundwater is the surface water is flowing into the aquifer from the stream. Whereas in a gaining stream, the water table is higher than the stream, so the stream is gaining water from the aquifer. So to just continue that cross section of the gaining stream, but to add a few things, let's add a well to the situation. Okay, so we've got it's a gaining stream, water table is higher than the stream. We start pumping this well. We're going to pump it for 10 days and see what happens. Well, what happens is we start dropping the water level, but just locally. And this is kind of what we were seeing in that monitoring over. Okay, what if we pump it for 100 days? Well, what happens is we drop the water table further to the point that we actually start reducing the discharge that's going from the aquifer into the stream. Now, let's say we pump this well for 1,000 days. We could potentially drop the water level to the point that now the groundwater flow direction has reversed and water is flowing from the stream to the aquifer. So this is why water conservation in Big Sky is probably what's going to carry us through if we're going to make this all work. Because the water has got to come from somewhere. And at some rate of groundwater withdrawal, you start dewatering these streams. Well, I didn't mean to be a bummer, so let's... So, what do we do now? Well, turn back to fly fishing. Lee Wolf, catch and release pioneer, uttered the famous phrase, game fish are too valuable to only be caught once. And we are lucky enough to have with us tonight 2 Montana water reuse pioneers, Ron Edwards and Rich Chandler. But how does water reuse affect water supply? Well, quite simply, water reuse for irrigation and snowmaking is water that would otherwise be pumped out of the local aquifers or the surface water bodies connected to them. So, treating reused water to the limits of technology, proper application rates, and extensive monitoring are going to ensure that water quality is not affected. Groundwater is too valuable to only be used once. That's all I got. Thanks.
Well, I always get this short straw and have to talk about wastewater. Again, so I'm Ron Edwards, Water and Sewer District. So I'm going to talk about the Sustainable Solutions Watershed Plan recommendations for 10 minutes maybe.
What?
So in the report, we reached a consensus as an overall group on 5 things. And those things are, we're going to look at upgrading our treatment plant to get to what we call limits of technology. We're going to look at addressing septic systems Those are largely outside of our district, but this study area is a lot bigger than the water and sewer district, and you have to keep that in mind. We're going to look at ways to expand reuse. Mike teed it up for me very well on our need to reuse groundwater and our water resource more than one time. And then we're going to look at developing reuse strategies for snowmaking, something that's never been done in Montana, and we're on a path to start looking at that. And then we're going to investigate shallow groundwater recharge. So I'll go through each one. The recommended action is to look at treatment strategies that does not negatively impact our waterways. The next steps for our district, you may have read that we entered into a contract at our last board meeting. The board approved moving ahead with it. It's a very significant contract that's going to take some time to work through. We're going to be looking at taking our treatment plant, which went online in 2004, so it's not even 20 years old, but we're going to look at upgrading that plant to try to attain treating to limits of technology. There's kind of two options that are earmarked for different engineering evaluations for that. Part of that will be getting detailed costs. I've got 3 engineers on my board. The first thing they ask is how much is this going to cost and how much is it going to cost to run and maintain it over time. So we need to get a lot of detailed information on that to help us make a decision on what kind of treatment plant we're going to be pursuing in the future. This is an aerial view of our current treatment plant. It's called the sequencing batch reactor plant. That was an $11.5 million facility back in 2004. We currently flow about 500,000 gallons a day to that facility. This is a slide that I think does a good job of kind of showing where we are now. This is what we're currently doing. We have this treatment plant, and then we have filtration, and we do a fairly good job with treating the water at this point for reuse, which right now is 100% spray irrigation. The goal is to get up to this point where we can start doing some things like groundwater recharge and snowmaking with water, treated water. Septic systems. We do allow septic trucks to deliver to our plant. We have a receiving station they can dump at our treatment plant. We've talked about developing pumping and maintenance programs largely outside of our district. I think there's an opportunity to expand central treatment services. These could be level 2 type systems or larger, small mechanical plants. And then Mike Richter and his crew is talking about doing another groundwater study in the canyon area of Big Sky. And here's why. When you look at our district boundary, we are fairly small in the big picture of this study area. These blue dots are groundwater wells from the GWIC site in Butte. And you can see we've got a lot of wells that are outside of our district, which is served by Central Water and Sewer. You can pretty much bet that every one of these well points also has a septic system on it. So there's a lot of areas that I'm down already, or 5 minutes. She's always in back, keeping me. Expand water reuse for irrigation. We've started working on a few of these things already. We're in meetings now with the key irrigators in Big Sky talking about ways that we can communicate better and improve the irrigation systems that we have. We're going to look at expanding what we call purple pipe. There's some low-hanging fruit around our golf course areas. The big condo tracks would be fairly easy to connect to the golf course system, start reusing water on those parcels. That does 2 things for us. It helps our disposal demand as well as it gets them off the drinking water system for large irrigation consumption. In 2018, we hope to have the Spanish Peaks Golf Course coming online. That'll add a third golf course to our overall disposal scheme here in Big Sky. And then we're also looking at expanded irrigation up in the Yellowstone Club and Spanish Peaks. Right, so there's the Meadow Course, Spanish Peaks, and the Yellowstone Club course. These two golf courses have been online for quite some time. And then probably the most promising thing at this point is looking at snowmaking and looking at the treatment options. So this engineering work is a necessary part of not only groundwater disposal options, but snowmaking, if we're going to go down that road. We're going to have to assess the feasibility of it. We're going to have to work with Boyne and the club, our resort neighbors, to make this work. We've got to work with MDEQ to figure out how you would permit snowmaking facilities, because there are none. And then the cost and funding for that. How we would do it, we've actually hydraulically, we're pretty close. This is the current pond in Spanish Peaks under construction. There's piping in place to get to a second pond. This is lower Southern Comfort. We're not very far away. So all the piping pieces are there. The next step is to figure out how we can actually implement it for snowmaking. Shallow groundwater, looking at ways to do groundwater disposal, and that could be, there's been a lot of talk about deep well injection. I don't think that's going to work for us up here, but we could look at large engineered drain fields, for example. And there's some areas around Big Sky that we want to look at. We'll work with MDEQ for groundwater discharge permits in the event we do go down that path. Again, there's cost, and then I do think there's a potential for water right mitigation if you get into groundwater disposal options. And these are some of the areas around the meadow that we're going to evaluate with our engineers. These are the Track B areas adjacent to the golf course. This is the area that Mike loves to call the meat hole or meat bucket right here. And so right now we do spray irrigation in these areas, but there may be opportunities to do like an engineered drain field in those areas. And questions, I guess, are at the end, so I'm done.
Ron thinks he drew the short straw, but I got the shorter straw. And I have to talk about all the unresolved issues. I feel like I'm here to express my personal, whatever. So I'm Tammy Swinney. I'm with the Gallatin Local Water Quality District. And I like to talk about unresolved issues. The good thing is, out of all the alternatives that the group came up with in all our 3 focus areas, there were only two unresolved alternatives that we were unable to reach consensus on as a group. So the forum as a whole had a rule that all alternatives had to meet goals and objectives that we identified as the forum together. So those 2 unresolved alternatives involved direct discharge of treated wastewater to the river systems and direct and or indirect potable water reuse. So the potable water reuse is an area that we didn't really have a lot of discussion in. There were a lot of unanswered questions there that no one felt we had the expertise to get into. So the focus here is going to be on the unresolved issue of direct discharge of treated wastewater to the river systems. And there were a lot of questions. So under ecological impacts, what were some of those questions? And I'm going to kind of summarize those. What treatment level can we get to that would have no negative impact to the river systems? We're not sure yet. Where would we discharge to? Would it be to the Gallatin main stem? Would it be the West Fork? Would it be a combination of those and other tributaries? When would we discharge? Would it be year-round? Would it be seasonal? Would it be only in times of drought conditions or extremely low flow conditions? What would the quantity of that discharge be? And how would it impact stream flows? What would the water quality of that discharge be? And how would it affect in-stream water quality? So what are the potential impacts and or benefits to all of those questions? When it comes to the mixing zone that you would have in a point discharge to the river, what effect would that have on aquatic life habitat? Unanswered question we need more information on. And is there any way that we could potentially avoid any negative impacts if we had a mixing zone, and what would it do? Are there any benefits? Maybe there are benefits to discharge to the river. We're not sure. Is there a potential to enhance stream flow during drought conditions, low flow extremes? Is there any way to augment water in-stream water temperatures when it's necessary? Is there a benefit to having these mixing zones or discharging to the river that might actually be of benefit to fisheries? We don't know. And are there benefits in comparing in-stream discharge to the other alternatives for treated reuse of the wastewater? Then we've looked at economic impacts. What are the questions for that alternative in those areas? What are the potential positive and negative impacts for local businesses, for the recreation-based businesses, for the retail operators, to real estate, for the construction businesses? What about downstream ag users and water right holders? How would direct discharge to the river systems impact those folks, positively or negatively? Looking at what's the cost, benefit, and risk analysis compared to the other alternatives, comparing in-stream, direct discharge to the river to all the other alternatives that are out there. Is there a benefit? What are the costs? What risks are there? And then, if we could treat to the limits of technology that would allow us to have no ecological impact to the river system, who would bear the cost for that? And could it be equitable amongst all the users? There are many operator management impacts and risks for this option versus other reuse alternatives, so those have to be taken into consideration as well. What are the social impacts to direct discharge? Would the community support if we could demonstrate that there'd be no ecological impacts to the river systems? Would the community support a change to going to direct discharge? If it turns out that after all the cost-benefit analysis would be done and direct discharge turned out to be the least expensive reuse alternative, does that make it more acceptable to the community? Does expanding centralized treatment to reduce nutrient loading to the river systems from septics and the small public systems that Ron was talking about there in the canyon and other areas outside the water and sewer district, would that justify direct discharge to the river systems? And overall, would the community be willing to pay for construction of a facility that is state-of-the-art, that could handle above and beyond treatments of technology and had no impact negatively to the river systems? These are all social questions that we don't really have the direct answers to yet. Okay, I guess that was my last slide. So, hold on. Especially for the social impacts, a lot of this stuff is going to be addressed, I think, hopefully, through this engineering study that is at AE2S that the Water and Sewer District has contracted with. A lot of these questions, we hope, will be answered, or at least we'll have more information to make better decisions as a result of that engineering study. And then also the fact that we need to do monitoring on our river systems and our groundwater. That'll also help us get some answers to these questions over the long term. So, okay, now I'm done.
All right, hello again, everyone. I'm Kristen Gardner, Executive Director of the Gallatin River Task Force, for those of you who might have showed up late. I'm going to talk about the implementation recommendations, and I thought I would start and end my discussion with a quote. The first, in the spirit of the upcoming Super Bowl. I'm sorry, I'm a New England Patriots fan.
Go Patriots.
So, in life, as in football, you won't go far unless you know where the goalposts are. So we have this grand vision, this grand plan. We know where we want to go, but how are we going to get there? The million-dollar question. So we believe that we need capacity in three main ways to fully implement this plan. The first is developing diverse partnerships amongst nonprofits, landowners, businesses, and agencies. We really already made a huge step forward with this through the watershed planning effort. I think all the stakeholders could say that we developed some really great relationships through this process. The second form of capacity will be coordination. So we'll need either an entity or entities to coordinate this effort, or perhaps a contractor. And then finally, we'll need funding to support all of the recommendations in this plan, to support staffing for coordination and also to support the project costs. So here's an example of partnerships so through the planning process, we conducted a survey, and the stakeholders signed up to become either lead partners or partners that are working on a particular recommendation, or reviewing the work of the recommendation. So this, for example, the Watershed Status and Trends Monitoring Program, I see the task force as being a lead partner in this effort with the Madison Conservation District, the Gallatin Local Water Quality District, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. As you can see, there are lots of other additional partners that are interested in working on this recommendation and reviewing the work of the partners that are working on this. So I see other people that we can reach out to as well for all of the different recommendations that we're working on. This is just a starting basis that we can begin our work on. So the partnerships will feed into what we see as at least 6 committees that will be working on the plan recommendations, and these were the 6 that we came up with. First is Healthy Headwaters, that's focusing on the water quality and stream flow, the conditions of riparian areas and wetlands, landscape conservation. Then we're looking at Big Sky Water Y, so it's the water conservation that Mike Richter really stressed we need to make sure happens in our community, as well as the treatment, storage, and reuse. Big Sky Unites would be the education and outreach community, so it's really important that we engage our community in this process. You all are obviously very engaged, you're here, you're learning, but there are so many people out there that don't understand the importance of water in our area. The funding piece is huge, so the Headwaters Fund, to fund this process, as you'll see on the next slide, it's a pretty enormous budget, so we'll need to figure out a way to fund all of these priorities. We have the Conserving Madison Headwaters, so the entities that are working on the Madison side. It's not as large of an area as the Gallatin side, but there are entities already working on issues in the Madison side. Ethan would be the main contact on that one. And then the Canyon partners, we really believe that the septic systems in the canyon need to be addressed. So we want to see a committee working on that particular issue. We see the committees being overseen by a steering committee that is reviewing the work and making sure that we're making progress on the recommendations of the plan. And then I think Bob Zimmer alluded to the working groups here in the red and the pink. For example, the monitoring working group would be developing that sampling analysis plan so we can check and make sure that we are making progress and not impacting our water systems. And then finally, we have discussed potentially an MOU or a good neighbor agreement where for some of the more complex issues like wastewater reuse, we might want to have some kind of working agreement amongst the partners for that. Here's the budget. So this is kind of the plan is really a 30,000 foot view. And we still have a lot of details for each of the recommendations to work out. So you can see there's a broad range in numbers. But it's going to take a lot of money to fund the recommendations in this plan. And I really see it being a combination of private and public partnerships to fund this pretty enormous budget. There's also been interest by the Nature Conservancy to develop a water fund, and I see Sierra back there that she can answer any questions anyone has on that. But they've had success in the United States as well as abroad, developing these water funds where users pay into the system, and that could potentially be a big piece of the pie. So we will have a funding committee that will be working specifically on this issue. And so my final quote is by Peter Drucker that plans are only good intentions unless they immediately degenerate into hard work. So not to say that making the plan was not a lot of hard work, because it really was, but I think now we really need to, get in there and put a lot of effort into making sure that this plan comes to fruition and it's just not another book on the shelf. So I encourage you all to share what you've learned tonight with your colleagues, with your neighbors, your friends, because really we need as many people working on this project as possible in our community if we want it to be a success. Thank you.
Howdy everyone, my name is Scott Posse and I'm the Northern Rockies Director for American Rivers. And Karen and Kristen asked me to present tonight from the perspective of a national conservation organization that works all over the country with communities all over the country, so we can kind of put this effort into a little bit of perspective. So for those of you that aren't familiar with American Rivers, our mission is to protect wild rivers, restore damaged rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. So I want to start off by getting a little personal with you. I'm probably one of the only people in the conservation community that can say this. I spent over a decade in the ski industry, working in the ski industry as a ski instructor and various other jobs. I've had a season pass at Big Sky for over 15 years, and I'm the son of a PGA golf pro and spent 10 years in the golf industry, actually 11 years in the golf industry. So not many conservationists can say that. On the other side of the equation, I don't tell too many people this unless they see me on the golf course and they're like, dude, what's Scott Posse doing on the golf course? But I've also spent my last 20 years in the conservation community working for nonprofit river conservation groups, and I love nothing more than fly fishing in the Gallatin River and other rivers across Montana and the Northern Rockies. So I have a lot of mixed feelings on these issues that we talked about tonight. I know many of you do as well. I mean, on the one hand, I can really appreciate the world-class recreational amenities that Big Sky has developed over the years. I'm a user of those amenities. And I also recognize how many people have really good jobs in Big Sky because of the development that's happened here. But on the other hand, part of me wishes that Big Sky wasn't booming as fast as it's booming, and I kind of wish it was a little less discovered, so that the impacts to our water and land and forest, and fish and wildlife resources might not be so great. And I know many of you share those mixed feelings about Big Sky right now, but it's precisely because I have those mixed feelings that I found this process to be so satisfying and this forum to be so satisfying. I've worked for state river conservation groups, regional river conservation groups, and national river conservation groups like American Rivers. I've participated in a lot of collaborative forums across the country. Some of them worked out pretty well, others not so much. I can tell you that over the last 18 months that I have found this to be the most functional, transparent, and satisfying collaborative process that I've participated in my 20-year conservation career. And I think that is a credit to two people in particular. I want to thank Kristen Gardner. Without Kristen's initiative and her fundraising efforts, this forum never would have launched in the first place. And then I want to thank Karen Filipovich, who's done a really masterful job facilitating this whole process. Karen, I think you really challenged us to be creative, to think outside the box, and to really set the bar high for ourselves. So thank you very much to both of you and to everyone that participated in this forum. So when I say we set the bar high, I want to put this into perspective a little bit. Most people get really upset when you talk about direct discharge into the Gallatin River. You've heard it. I've heard it. I hear it from anonymous people that call me and email me all the time. I did a little research prior to this evening because I wanted to find out what some of Big Sky's peer mountain resort communities are doing when it comes to managing their water resources. So I looked at Jackson, Wyoming. Okay, Jackson, Wyoming, which really prides itself on its conservation ethic and protecting wildlands and wildlife. They have a wastewater discharge permit that authorizes them to discharge 5 million gallons a day of treated wastewater into the Snake River, which is a federally designated wild and scenic river that I work to get protected as a wild and scenic river. Sun Valley, Idaho. okay, in Sun Valley, Ketchum, Haley, that area, they are authorized to discharge 4 million gallons per day of treated wastewater into the Bigwood River. And for those of you that like fly fishing, the Bigwood's a pretty awesome fishery, nationally renowned. And then I looked at Aspen, because you gotta compare the Big Sky to Aspen. And Aspen, which really prides itself on its environmental ethic, they're authorized to discharge 3 million gallons a day of treated wastewater into the Roaring Fork River, which is another national class wild trout fishery. So you may ask, well, gosh, Big Sky's always asking itself, what do we want to be when we grow up? Well, we want to be Jackson, we want to be Sun Valley, we want to be Aspen. I don't think we want to be any of those. I think we want to be better, okay? You may ask, well, if they're all taking the easy route and they're all discharging their treated wastewater into their local waterways, well, why can't Big Sky? Well, isn't that kind of like encouraging your kid to be a C- student? Just skate by, just finish school, maybe you can get a job. I think we want to be an A+ student, okay? I think Big Sky can really be a model. And that's what drove this whole process, is we created a vision for this forum at the very beginning, and that we were going to be a model mountain community for the way we manage our water resources here. And I think that vision is really what made this whole forum a success. I just want to conclude by saying, and I visit lots of communities across the country. I've lived in Bozeman for the last 20 years. But when I visit communities and I ask them, what would you have done differently when it comes to managing your water resources? I can tell you there's not a single community that took proactive measures to protect their water resources that said, we regret doing that, okay? Conversely, I've heard a lot of communities say, if we only could have done it all over again, it would have been completely different. And what we would have done is we would have come up with a plan like the one that Big Sky is developing right now. So I want you to keep that in mind as you read through this watershed plan. Keep in mind, it's bold, it's innovative, and it's extremely rare that you can bring these diverse stakeholders to the table, that you can raise the bar, and really set a goal that's worth achieving. So thank you to everyone that's participated in this process and made it a great success so far.
Hi, I'm Karen Flipovich. I'm the one who's been standing in the back of the room doing this. Thank you so much to all of our stakeholders. Stakeholders, if you could raise your hands again, please. Folks who participated. Now I really want to thank them. You guys, this is an incredible group. They pushed Jeff and I. We hope we kept up with them for the whole time. And the product that you're reading is really a thoughtful group of people who are trying to do something that really we've been looking for quite a while. We don't see anybody else in the country trying to do all 3 water resource focus areas simultaneously. This is something new and special. We're going to take some questions now, but I wanted the stakeholders to raise their hands because the decision was, look, everybody here is an expert. If your question is appropriately answered by one or more of them, we want to do that. And stakeholders, if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself if you're answering, just so we can kind of keep track. With that, I will start taking some questions. Anyone have one? Yes, sir.
You talk a lot about making snow and water. What about this general irrigation out in the woods?
Okay.
For fire mitigation or just better rainfall rating. Just keep making snow all year.
Okay, so what your question is, you talk about snow, but what about reuse of irrigation for forest? Anybody want to take that one? We did discuss this. So does anybody want to talk about this? Any of our stakeholders?
Sure.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
Good question. My name is Kevin Germain. I work with Gold Mountain Land Company and been working up in the Basin for about 15 years. Sorry. Kevin Germain, been working in the Moonlight Basin for about 15 years. Currently, that is how we dispose of our effluent up in Moonlight. We have a privately owned, publicly regulated water and sewer company, and we sprinkler dispose of our effluent out into the lodgepole forest. The challenge or the downside that I see with that disposal methodology is it's 100% consumptive. Per our permits with the DEQ, we can only apply enough that the plant's uptake will transpire and it's lost from the system. And so one of the reasons why snowmaking is such an elegant reuse is you only lose about 28% of that in consumption in the form of sublimation. So 72% of that can return to the watershed.
As the representative of the group that's not a scientist, can you slow that just a little bit?
So, we can only apply just enough water, and it's the same thing on our golf courses. You can only apply just enough that the plants can use. So none of that water percolates into the ground and recharges the groundwater. So it's 100% consumed and lost from our system here. And with snowmaking, only 28% is theoretically lost in the form of sublimation, which is evaporating from the snow. 72% of that water will return in the form of either runoff in the spring or deep, percolating through the soils and recharging our groundwater systems.
Yes, ma'am.
This is probably more, but where does the discharge from Mountain Village go? You have Moonlight doing that, but does Big Sky do something different on our side of the mountain? Or does it come down?
Wrong.
Everything comes down.
I know.
That's a perfect segue.
Yeah.
So our district boundary goes up basically to the Moonlight gate.
All right.
And then so it's the Mountain Village, Upper Cascade. Everything flows down to the meadow, to the plant that I showed you the picture.
Yes. Yes.
How do you discharge of it, though, was your question?
We store. We store. If you look at these ponds in the fall, they're low, and then we take all this flow. Our peak days are actually in the winter months because we're a big destination resort. We have a lot of people here in the winter. So we fill them up over the winter to turn around and irrigate during the summer months starting around the 1st of May. And it's been that way for 40 years here. We've been a zero discharge community for a very long time. And we make compost out of 100% of our wastewater sludge too.
Great. Oh, Scott, you had something to add? Then
I'd just like to throw a question out there as a segue to that. For those of you that still do work in the ski industry, what does the industry think with climate change and our winters getting shorter about the need for additional water for snowmaking?
Rich, you want to take that? Introduce yourself.
I'm Rich Chandler. I work at the Yellowstone Club. I'm also a board member on the Gallatin Task Force. I've been in the ski industry since I was 14. I don't think I've ever gotten out of it. But to Scott's point, through the time, it's been realized that climate change is in fact real. We might have a good year, like Mike pointed out. 2011, I think, was a good year, followed by 2012, which was an incredibly poor year. The trend is drier and warmer, and it's creating a more reliance on snowmaking. And I don't think this is local. You see it within all these snowmaking companies. They're expanding across the United States. They're capturing a footprint that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Thank you. Sir, you had a question.
Yes, so where does the water from Big Sky and Moonlight and Yellowstone come from? Is it the aquifers in the Middle Village? And secondly, what's the chances that that water runs out? I mean, nobody's addressed that.
Mike, you want to start? And I know there's more, but
Well, yeah. In terms of Ron can correct me when I'm wrong on this, but the water in the mountain village comes from wells in the mountain village.
In the mountain village.
Yeah, there actually is another really small sand and gravel aquifer up there, and also some productive volcanic rock that those wells are completed in. So that water comes from up there. Some You did. Some water is piped to Yellowstone Club.
Correct.
Is it not?
We sell water to the club off the mountain.
And Yellowstone Club has its own wells as well, as does Moonlight Basin. So there are higher altitude aquifers that are being used in those areas.
How much do we know about how interconnected those aquifers are? Do they operate completely independent of each other?
No, they don't. They leak water into one another. We definitely see that snowmelt is the biggest recharge source in all of the different aquifers in this area. And all of the wells that we monitor, that snowmelt pulse every year is the biggest source of recharge.
I can add to that. We used to have 3 separate water systems, the mountain, the meadow, and Aspen Grove, supplied to tanks with their own wells, multiple wells. In 2006, we ran a water pipeline to connect the mountain down through Aspen Groves to the Meadow Village. So now we are one big connected distribution system, which actually helps us considerably because we take advantage of the storage tanks that are on the mountain, our biggest ones up in Cascade. We have the ability to feed water down to the meadow so we can balance and manage our water distribution better. And we have 14 groundwater wells.
Peter, do you have anything to add? Because you look at so many of the individual wells and outlying areas within the Big Sky area. Is there anything you want to add to that question?
You're serviced by the Big Sky Water and Sewer District. You're very grateful for the quality of water that you find here. Generally, as you progress outside of these sand and gravel aquifers, you tend to find water that's a lot heavier in iron, hydrogen sulfide, and a lot of other mineral content, which ultimately can be problematic and expensive to deal with. So, highest quality water in Big Sky is generally found in the municipal water systems.
There's a gentleman back there, and then I'll get you.
Karen, you wrote an article on the task force page that said that you couldn't the stakeholders did not come to a consensus on a wastewater discharge. I'd like to know which one of the stakeholders are the holdouts. Who are the holdouts on this?
A holdout is the wrong question. As Tammy outlined, there's a set of unresolved questions, and I would hate to pigeon any one of these stakeholders as being a holdout because really we didn't have a convergence of perspectives based on the information that was available right now. I think we could go through on any given day and find several different ones. So
the Great Yellowstone Coalition is against it, Trout Unlimited is against it, American Rivers is against it.
Sir, there's also people who think it's a genuinely beneficial way to go. And those
if they're in the room,
I encourage you to talk to them.
Raise their hand. Please raise your
Actually,
hand.
our strongest holdout, our strongest proponent is not in this room tonight. But to answer your question, and I'll let the stakeholders take the rest. The unresolved questions is where we really ended up after a pretty thorough discussion. Does anybody from our stakeholder want to talk about it? Because to say people have a position is, I think, a mischaracterization of how the stakeholders approach this discussion for that and every other alternative.
Yeah, I think it was more a lot of people's, from whatever perspective they were coming from, ended up saying, look, I can't even consider this idea one way or the other until these questions are answered. And so, acknowledging that, we made a list of what those questions needed to be answered before that could even be an option. So it really didn't get, the conversation because of that didn't get to a point of, are you for this or against this? Because it couldn't be agreed on what the this is. And that needs to be agreed on first before anybody can weigh in. They have to know what we're weighing in on before any of that could be. So this was really more of an attempt to characterize what do all these different stakeholders need to know, what questions they have to have answered before that discussion could even take place.
Yeah, I think that's
Tammy, and then Susan.
I'm David O'Connor. I'm one of the owners of Bucks T4 and president of the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce.
Tammy.
Down there, right?
No, I'm on Lagoon System.
Y'all have had some violations down there, right?
Pardon me?
Y'all have had some violations down there with wastewater and Bucks T4?
Not in particular. We've had a bad test every once in a while, as most water systems do, but we've complied with everything, and that information is all public. Be happy to discuss it with anybody.
This is Tammy Swinney with the Water Quality District. I would just echo what David said, and that I don't think any one person in the forum had a strong, like 100% one way or 100% another way, but there's just a lot of unanswered questions, which there's a list of those questions in the appendices of the plan that you can go through that. I mean, I just tried to summarize some of them as a group in my little 5-minute presentation, but there's a lot of questions to be answered before anyone can make any decisions one way or another on direct discharge or potable water reuse.
Susan, did you have something you wanted to add on this point?
Susan Duncan, Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators. I think most of the concerns about discharge, whether it's on land or on a golf course or in a river or whatever else, kind of hinges on what the quality of that discharged water is. And that's one of those unanswered questions. Again, there may be problems with how much all at once or when, and those other issues that Tammy brought up. There's a whole slew of them, but I think when I talk about discharging effluent into a river or anything else, everybody gets the idea it's raw sewage. That's the picture in their head. And that's not necessarily what it is or what it could be. And so it's a matter of sorting all that out and actually laying out exactly what it is you want to discharge, when, where, how.
Okay, thank you.
Can I chime in one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Guy Olsenser, representative from Missouri Waterkeeper, and this is from a conservation group perspective. I think that the way my organization approached it, and I thought a lot of people in the forum were very receptive to, was the concept of what is the highest and best use of your water. That we're in a very fragile ecological system here, where you have a finite water supply, and any type of diminution or diminished quality can dramatically affect the local water resource. So what we tried to approach it, and at least my organization really kept on hammering on, was what is the best way that we can make water work for us time and time again in this upstream, finite supply neighborhood. And that's why we emphasize in this plan, to a large extent, the idea of snowmaking, and to a lesser extent, the concept of potable reuse. Because these are concepts that technology has proven in other places, you can make water work more than once. You can make it work 2, 3, 4 times, that you can help address some of the real ecological impairment issues that we talked about in terms of what is the ecological health of the river system. If you're doing good recharging with your snow, it's filtering in, it's helping alleviate the problems longer into the summer season when we don't have those flows. Likewise, it's helping bolster after being filtered. And by the way, this is all predicated on limits of technology treatment, where we're talking about getting it to the highest and best use that technology can treat it. If we're doing those types of things and really getting it to a very high, clean level where it's pure, we should be using it more than once up here. And that discussion, again, this context of highest and best use obviates the need to even look at the discharge permit. And I thought that was where, from my perspective, many of the forum members came down, was that we don't even need to go down a path of looking at this other option of putting a pipe in a river, because we actually have technology, and hopefully we have the will to get it done in terms of these alternative technologies that are very novel, that are outside the box, and hopefully we have the gumption to get it done.
Great. Thank you, Guy. Joan, question?
Yeah, my name is John Meyer. I'm with Cottonwood Environmental Law Center in Bozeman. As I was driving down here from Bozeman this evening, I looked at House Rock and the water flowing past House Rock, and it brought me back to a few years ago when I was whitewater rafting. And the raft I was in capsized, and it was a little bit scary, I'm not going to lie, for a second. And it was exciting, and it was an amazing memory. And the idea of swimming at House Rock in treated wastewater is not very palatable, not very, I'm just not terribly interested in that idea. And I'm guessing other people who have swam in the Gallatin are not interested in swimming in treated wastewater as well.
John, do you have a question for the stakeholders?
I have a question. So I heard Guy just now say that he thinks there's alternatives to discharging.
I believe recommendations cover that.
Okay, so my question to Scott Posse, American Rivers, if we want to make Big Sky a A+ model mountain community, would American Rivers sign on to the petition we submitted today to the Montana Department of Environmental Quality and the Board of Environmental Review that classifies the Gallatin as an outstanding resource of water?
You know, John, there was an ORW process that kicked off with American Wildlands many, many years ago. We were involved in that process later on after American Wildlands actually went under. We kind of kept it alive before the Board of Environmental Review.
Thank you.
In the meantime, I think this community came together and looked at ways that we might be able to meet or exceed the goals of an ORW designation. And in fact, we helped fund a study that Kevin or Ron helped me out with this, that HKM Dow did, that compared nutrient levels in the Gallatin River with the ORW designation versus hooking up a lot of the development in the river corridor with the central treatment system. And what we found through that study is there are actually more effective ways to keep the Gallatin River clean and make it even cleaner by pursuing that path than through a simple ORW designation. So from our perspective, the bottom line is water quality in the river. And we're going to take the path that yields the best result for that. And we feel pretty good about this collaborative process and that we might be able to achieve those goals.
Great.
I got a follow-up.
Quick,
Do you think
because I
that
have another stakeholder I
ORW
think would like to help.
designation would hurt the Gallatin River?
No.
So will you sign on to the petition protecting the Gallatin with an ORW petition?
You know, since we haven't talked about that, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards.
So
yeah, thank you. Eric, do you want to, just for the broader audience, since I think some of this is real inside baseball for some of the folks here, maybe just very briefly tell us what an ORW is and what it does and doesn't do?
Sure, for the audience, I guess. My name is Eric Urban. I'm with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, oversee water quality standards, which is what an ORW would come under. It stands for Outstanding Resource Water. It's a water body that would go through a process to get designated that. It doesn't mean no discharge. What it does mean is if any and all sources for potential pollutants come to that water body, they would have to be held to a very high standard, and that would be no change in water quality. Whereas most of the waters in Montana, there is a process to go through to potentially change water quality under certain permitting actions. So a lot of bureaucratic talk in there, but essentially it's considering the water at a very high level and putting a high value on it and requiring all sources to a very high standard for that water.
One thing that I'd like to add real quickly is an ORW designation is prospective. So basically what it means is in the future, we're not going to allow X, Y, and Z. But if we really want to maximize water quality and quantity in the Gallatin River, I think we need to look at what we can do to restore problems where they exist, and we need to look forward to avoid future pollution. And that's the path that I think is a wiser one.
Scott, you just talked about taking proactive measures. If there's no RW designation that's passed, you can still restore the water quality while having that RW designation. I have 2 copies of the petition if everybody wants.
Okay, and talk to John afterwards if you'd like. Andrea,
so
you have a question?
To the groundwater discussion earlier, at what point with our current growth trajectory that we're on, will we be consuming more water than what's recharging within an annual year on a consistent basis?
Well, that the
this groundwater investigations program's model and study hopefully will shed some light on that. Ron, what is
We did a source capacity study a couple of years ago, and everything with growth projections, water demand and supply, the lines cross around 2025. But there's a lot of variables that go into that. For example, we've got data that shows in the summer we use 7 to 8 times the amount of water for irrigation around here, and we have more people here in the winter and use a lot less. We've got 2 wells on the mountain, Cascade Wells 5 and 6, that have H2S sulfide in them. So we don't use those wells very much. We do in the summer turn them on and dilute those with the other wells up there. If we can find a suitable treatment option for that water on the mountain, that would allow us to run that water separately from the other wells. So there are a lot of variables that go into that.
And are some of these plans that are in this strategic plan or watershed plan, are they able to be implemented before 2025?
The short answer is yes.
I'm going to jump in on that and say that the Water Quality District, we're looking at adopting a couple of the Bureau's wells that are here in the Meadow Village already. We've already have several of those sensors that Mike talked about in monitoring wells here in the district, along with wells that are being monitored by the Bureau. And we're hoping to adopt some of those wells, and we're going to do water quality testing on those long term, and keep looking at water quantity, water levels to help answer those questions. So we're going to start as soon as possible on that. So
we had a meeting last week talking to Tammy and her group about partnering to do water quality monitoring as well as logging static water levels over time. GWIC will, or the Bureau of Mines will take the data we give them and put it into their database, which is a great thing.
So start to build that baseline data so we can start building from there.
Great. I see you. This is going to be the final question, so I'm going to make 2 plugs before we do this, and then we'll take this. First of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for being involved. If you haven't gotten this already, the handout in the back, please do, because at the bottom, in addition to hopefully a synopsis of really the recommendations of the things that this group says we ought to be doing, it also has a link so you can get to the full report. And I thought Kristen said it well. Plans are only good intentions unless they immediately degenerate into hard work. I hope all of you, as you read the plan, will think about where you can be involved, because that's going to be really important. I do want to ask this last question. Sir, what's your question?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Do we know the basic breakdown of water usage in Big Sky? Does it reflect trends globally that commercial usages at the resorts are highest, or further down by residential, or where does snowmaking and irrigation lie in terms of?
Well, in our district, the water sewer district, we have meters on everything, so we've got a lot of data on usage. One of Big Sky's challenges is that we have a lot of areas that are unmetered. So how do we get our arms around that to start looking at water usage across an area bigger than just our district?
Anybody want to, I think your second part of your question is, do we know how this is related to other resorts? Anybody? I think that's something of a question, but...
yeah, or resort towns. Like, where did, is snowmaking at both resorts pretty high?
Snowmaking with treated wastewater or fresh water? You guys, we got snowmaking experts. I should not answer this one.
There's only 2 other resorts that are doing treated wastewater snowmaking, right?
No.
In the United States?
No, there's more.
So in terms of freshwater usage, where does all this irrigation, snowmaking, residential use, commercial use sort of?
I see. I don't know the answer, but I just got a question.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Snowmaking is on, excuse the pun, on par with golf course irrigation. 1.5 million a day, I think, when they're cranking on the mountain. Right now, all that's coming from Lake Levinsky. And when they're going hard That's about what we do on the golf course here. The one golf course in the meadow, it's about 1.5 million a day. So,
But the one's freshwater and the one's treated.
right. And so that's why I say snowmaking opens the door up for a disposal option that's wintertime in fairly high daily demand at times.
It's putting money in the bank.
Great. Thank you. And snowmaking itself varies widely, as does irrigation on golf courses based on environment. Thank you for coming. Please feel free, if you've got individual questions, talk to the stakeholders more, and we hope to see you in implementation.